Thank you for joining us today for Jennifer Strauss and Associates in our Webinar Wednesday program, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. We're covering representations and certifications in this special topics two-part webinar series. And today we'll be covering the DFARS Part 252 portion in supplement to last week's webinar, which was FAR Part 52. And these webinars will be posted on our website and YouTube channel later today. Our webinars are provided complimentary and they are recorded and can be downloaded from our website and YouTube channel, which now holds over 450 of our government contracting webinars. In the interest of time, we do not take questions, so if you do have questions for our speaker, we will have her information on the last slide of the presentation today. Okay, now a little bit about us. We work with U.S. federal government contractors, including product, service, and software firms. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles and compliance, and more information can be found on our website. I wanted to highlight an additional webinar we are holding this year. The title of the webinar is Fiscal New Year Kickoff Best Practices, and it will be on October 1st at 12 p.m. Both the sponsor link and registration link can be found on your screen and on our website. Our speakers will be covering market research, marketing, sales and capture, proposal writing, and compliance. Sponsorships are available. Please email hello@jenniferstrauss.com for pricing details. I also wanted to inform you of a new series that we're holding this year in 2021. We've launched a monthly series called the GovCon Live Q&A Cafe. And this is a live webinar series held each month that will take place on the second Friday of each month this year at 12 p.m. Eastern. We have assembled a group of 4 panelists who are subject matter experts on a specific federal contracting topic. The panelists will make a short presentation about the topics listed here on your screen, and then take your live questions about that topic. So for example, our panelists covered proposal writing last month, and this Friday on August 13th, our panelists will be covering compliance. Our panelists include attorneys, consultants, and other industry professionals, and you can sign up on our website under the Q&A Cafe tab. Sponsorships are available. Please email hello@jenniferstrauss.com for a media kit with pricing details. Also, please note that you can use code DFARS for a $15 discount on each of these webinars. So again, to cover this month, our speakers will be covering compliance with Ryan, Rebecca, and Mark. And then for September, our speakers will be covering oral presentations, and that will be with Rena, Troy, Andres, and Deborah. On October 8th, our panelists will be covering set-asides with Anna, Eric, Tim, and Sai. On November 12th, Marcia, Michael, Jeff, and Tracy will be covering pricing. And then lastly, on December 10th, Shirley, Joshua, Brad, and Kate will be covering M&A. Again, you can use code DFARS for a $15 discount to bring your costs at $20. Okay, now to introduce our speaker, Diana Lynn Curtis McGraw. Welcome, Diana. We are glad to have you here with us today, and I'll now turn the floor over to you.
Great, thank you, Hunter. If you can go to the next slide, we will cover today we'll be covering the DFARS overview of the reps and certs. Let's take a look at the next slide. On the agenda today, it's quite packed. We will cover the basic alternate A annual reps and certs, and with that, we will cover the additional reps and certs that you're likely to see in your solicitations, which include everything from the covered defense telecommunications equipment or services, economic price adjustment, prohibitions on acquisition of certain foreign commercial satellite services, disclosure of ownership or control, representation of extent of transportation by sea, disclosure of ownership or control by a foreign government, Buy American, trade agreements, And then we will also cover reps and certs for the demonstration project for contractors employing persons with disabilities, and we'll close with some special construction and equipment charges. Next slide. In our last webinar, last Wednesday, we reviewed the reps and certs, highlighting important provisions from the Federal Acquisition Regulations. Reps and certs, the process requires contractors to demonstrate its capabilities to perform the project by disclosing business information. Contractors must also certify that it is complying to all the laws and regulations relevant to each proposal or solicitation. Each agency requires different types of reps and certs depending on size and the nature of the project. Reps and certs in the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, also known as DFARS, are geared towards the Department of Defense contracts. While there are some similarities, the DFARS highlight heightened importance of cybersecurity compliance. Specifically, the Department of Defense contracts require strict security measures to protect national defense. Let's take a look at the next slide. When submitting reps and certs to the federal government, it's important for contractors to certify that they're complying with all conditions that they have admitted. In a case from 2016, landmark Escobar case, the Supreme Court held that the implied false certification theory can be a basis for liability. Specifically, liability can attach when the contractor submits a claim for payment that makes specific representations about the goods or services provided, but knowingly fails to disclose the defendant's noncompliance with statutory, regulatory, or contractual requirements. A misrepresentation about compliance with a statutory, regulatory, or contractual requirement must be material to the government's payment decision in order to be actionable under the False Claims Act. 31 U.S.C. Section 3729B4 states that the term material means having a natural tendency to influence or be capable of influencing the payment or receipt of money or property. Whether a claim is knowingly misrepresenting compliance is critical in determining a false claim. Critical to represent and certify in a way that is not materially misrepresenting to the federal government. So let's take a look at the next slide. This is DFARS 252-204-7007 Alternate A for the annual reps and certs. And similar to the FAR 52204-7 and 8, this provides very similar language, and it requires you to certify whether or not paragraph E of this section applies. So let's take a look at the next slide to see what paragraph E states. Paragraph E states that the offeror has completed the annual reps and certs electronically via the SAM website. After reviewing the SAM database information, the offeror verifies by submission of the offer that the reps and certs currently posted electronically that apply to the solicitation as indicated in FAR 52204-8C and paragraph D of this provision have been entered or updated within the last 12 months, are current, accurate, complete, and applicable to this solicitation as of the date of the offer and are incorporated in this offer by reference, except for the changes that are identified below. And you'll see a chart that will identify the FAR DFARS provision by title, date, and then it will identify specifically the change if there is one. Let's take a look at the next page. So what will happen is you will have listed in your solicitation which DFARS provisions that are going to be applicable to the solicitation or the eventual award of the contract. Specifically, we're going to review today are the different provisions that you are likely to see that relate specifically to DFARS. So the first one we're going to cover is 252-204-7016, which is Covered Defense Telecommunications Equipment or Services Representation. This applies to all solicitations for Department of Defense This DFARS provision was recently updated in December of 2019 to implement Section 1656 of the Security of Nuclear Command, Control, and Communication System from commercial dependencies of the FY 2018 NDAA. In addition to the term covered defense telecommunications equipment or services, the term covered foreign country includes the people of the Republic of China and the Russian Federation. In addition to 252-204-7016 covered defense telecommunications equipment or services, the DoD requires that all contracts except for commercial off-the-shelf items to have DFARS 252-704-7012, safeguarding covered defense information and cyber incident reporting. And we're going to get into each of these additional requirements here in just a few seconds. So let's take a look at the next slide. On May 21st, 2021, President Biden issued Executive Order 14028, which is the executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. It directed the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, in consultation with the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and the Director of National Intelligence, to review the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement contract language for contracting with IT and OT service providers, and to recommend updates to such requirements and language to the FAR Council. The new executive order is in response to persistent and increasingly sophisticated malicious cyber campaigns that threaten the public sector, the private sector, and ultimately the American people's security and privacy. We expect to see various changes in the DFARS as early as September of 2021, less than a month away. New regulations that require strengthened security measures, especially in the digital space. Let's take a look at the next slide. So let's look at what the differences are in Department of Defense contracting versus the DFARS. The DFARS includes more stringent cybersecurity requirements than the FAR. If you recall, FAR 52204-21 requires contractors and subcontractors to meet 15 basic safeguarding requirements to protect covered contractor information systems that stores, processes, or transmits federal contract information not intended for public release. And I do apologize. Let's advance the slide. And Hunter, if we could advance the slide one more time. And it looks like, I don't know if we're having a little bit of difficulty with the slides, but I'm going to continue on discussing the differences between FAR 52204-21 and the DFARS 252-204-712. And Hunter, if you could go back 2 slides. There we go. Okay, so the important thing to remember here is that the difference between these two, the DFARS really requires you to cover information systems, not just the information contained on the system. FAR 52204-21 is equivalent to what the CMMC is level 1. The first contract clause, this is the first contract clause to meaningfully address cybersecurity information systems across all agencies, not just the Department of Defense. That was the 52204-21. It's supposed to reflect actions that any prudent person would use, and rather than basic requirements, there are no requirements for training, penetration testing, cyber incident reporting, or cybersecurity insurance. So now let's take a look at the next slide, and we'll talk in more detail about 252-204-712. Again, this covers the information, not just the system itself. It incorporates the NIST SP 800-171, and it requires the implementation of 110 security requirements on covered contractor information systems And under the interim rule, document and system security plans and plan of actions, while they're not a requirement as of yet, they are suggested or recommended to be implemented when feasible. What's important to note here is that you want to ensure that information systems and personnel are prepared to handle cyber incident reporting requirements that require identifying compromised computers, servers, specific data, and user accounts, analyzing information systems that were part of a cyber attack, analyzing other systems that do not contain covered data but may have been accessed as a result of the cyber incident to identify compromised defense information, the ability to rapidly report cyber incidents within 72 hours of discovery, and that is the hot ticket item. That's the one item that's going to be a little challenging for everyone to implement. And then additionally, the ability to discover, isolate, and submit malicious software to the contracting officer. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. And you'll see on September 29, 2020, the Department of Defense issued several interim rules that amended the DFARS implementation of the CMMC requirements and have provided a 5-year phased rollout ending September 20th of 2025. These 3 new interim rules are DFARS Clause 252-204-7019. This is the Notice of NIST SP 800-171 Department of Defense Assessment Requirements. Additionally, you have 252-204-7020. This is the NIST SP 800-171 DoD Assessment Requirements. And then finally, DFARS Clause 252-204-7021, which implements the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Requirements. Looking at, just taking a couple of these first to discuss. Looking at 7020, so that's 252-204-7020. It's that middle new interim rule that's listed on the slide currently. That requirement requires contractors to subject to DFARS 252-204-7012 to self-complete a basic assessment and upload the resulting score into the Supplier Risk Management System, SPRS for short, prior to contract award. Medium and high assessments will be completed by the government, and the transition clause for this is until and through October 1st of 2025. Looking at DFARS 252-204-7021, which is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Requirements, this requires contractors to maintain the requisite CMMC level for the duration of the contract. Both requires contractors to flow the same requirements down to subcontractors in all subcontracts and other contractual requirements. This includes your 7020 clause for the SP 800-171 assessments, information systems relevant to the offer, and the 7021 clause for CMMC requirements, the CMMC level that is appropriate for the information. Let's take a look at the next slide. And now we're going to move on from, now obviously we just finished up cybersecurity, and for those of you that are not familiar with the CMMC, I believe you can go to Jennifer Schaus's website to learn more about the CMMC protocols, but that is something that you can have an entire presentation on. We're going to move forward so that we can cover several other of these DFARS requirements that come up in your annual reps and certs. Now we're going to turn to the economic price adjustment. This applies to solicitations for fixed price supply and service contracts when the contract is to be performed wholly or in part in a foreign country, and the foreign government controls wage rates or material prices and may during contract performance impose a mandatory change in wages and prices of the materials. Essentially, what you see here is that you, as the offeror, will represent that your price that's set forth in your offer are based on the wage rates or material prices that are established or controlled by the government or whichever country in which this work will be performed. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next page. We're now going to cover the prohibition on acquisition of certain foreign commercial satellite services and representations. While obviously this is a very targeted DFARS provision in your annual reps and certs, it really relates to work that's performed related to satellite services. We'll just briefly cover what's listed here. So this applies to solicitations for the acquisition of commercial satellite services. This DFARS provision implements Section 1603 of the NDAA FY 2018. And it's important to note that the definitions you should look at when related to this, specifically for cybersecurity risk, that term means threats to the vulnerabilities of information or information systems that any related consequences caused by or resulting from unauthorized access, use, disclosure, degradation, disruption, modification, or destruction of such information or information systems, including such related consequences caused by the act of terrorism. Additionally, the term covered foreign country, these are defined in the clause at DFARS Supplement 252-225-7051 in the event that you want to see which countries qualify as covered foreign countries. Let's take a look at the next slide. What you will be representing is that you, the offeror, you are not a foreign entity in which the government of a covered foreign country has ownership. Additionally, and there are quite a few of these that we're going to go through so that you can actually see each of the items, and I believe that we have approximately 9 to cover. So the first one is that you're not a foreign entity in which the government of a covered foreign country has an ownership. The second is that you're not a foreign entity that plans to provide satellite services under the contract from a covered foreign country. Obviously, if you are, you have to identify that covered foreign country. You have to represent whether or not you are offering commercial satellite services provided by a foreign entity in which the government of a covered foreign country has an ownership interest that enables the government to effect satellite operations. If the answer is affirmative, you must identify or disclose a foreign country. Let's take a look at the next slide. Oh, and just for those of you that were wondering what a covered foreign country means, that's the People's Republic of China, North Korea, the Russian Federation, or any country that is a state sponsor of terrorism. Item number 4 on your representation for this DFARS provision is that you're not offering commercial satellite services provided by a foreign entity that plans or is expected to provide satellite services under the contract from a covered foreign country. Under item 5, you are representing that you're not offering commercial satellite services that will affect the use of the satellites launched on or after December 31st, 2022. Next slide. Item 6 is that you're not offering commercial satellite services that will use satellites launched on or after December 31st, 2022 that will be designed or manufactured by an entity controlled in whole or in part by acting on behalf of the government of a covered foreign country. Item number 7 is that you're not offering commercial satellite services that will use satellites launched outside the United States on or after December 31st, 2022 using a launch vehicle that is designed or manufactured in a covered foreign country. Next slide. And these are the last 2. 8 is that you're not offering commercial satellite services that will use satellites launched outside the U.S. on or after December 31st, 2022 using a launch vehicle that is provided by the government of a covered foreign country. And finally, that you're not offering commercial satellite services that will use satellites launched outside the U.S. on or after December 31st, 2022 using a launch vehicle that is provided by an entity controlled in whole or in part by a covered foreign entity. And to be clear, a launch vehicle means a fully integrated space launch vehicle. With that, and similar to the other DFARS provisions that we're going to review today, once you make these representations that are identified here in paragraph C, These are material representations of fact upon which reliance will be placed when making the award. If it's later determined that the offeror knowingly rendered an erroneous representation in addition to other remedies available to the government, the contracting officer may terminate the contract resulting from the solicitation for default. So it's extremely important that you take time and conduct your due diligence to ensure that the representations and certifications that you're providing to the government during the solicitation process, the work acquisition, in your proposals and your responses to these solicitations are true, accurate. Otherwise, there are significant consequences along the line. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. In the event that, and this is the last slide that will cover the commercial satellite services, in the event that you have answered affirmatively to any of the representations we covered in C, which, C7 through C9, you have to provide a disclosure of relating to the launch services that were either fully paid for by the satellite service provider or covered by a legally binding commitment of the satellite service provider to pay for such services. They want you to provide the award of the contract or other agreement, the date the contract or agreement was awarded, and the period of performance. Let's take a look at the next slide. This is related to DFARS 252, 225, 70, 50, the disclosure of ownership or control by the government of a country that is a state sponsor of terrorism. It's important to note here that in accordance with 10 U.S.C. 2327, it is prohibited from the Secretary of Defense that no contract may be awarded to a firm if the government of a country that is a state sponsor of terrorism owns or controls or has a significant interest in the firm, a subsidiary of the firm, or any other firm that owns or controls the firm. And so let's just be clear, this applies to all solicitations expected to result in contracts that are greater than $150,000 or more. Additionally, to make sure that we're clear on some of the defined terms in this provision, the government of a country that is a state sponsor of terrorism, that term is defined. It includes the state and the government of a country that is a state sponsor of terrorism, as well as any political subdivision, agency, or instrumentality thereof. And what is significant interest? Significant interest is defined as the ownership of or beneficial interest in 5% or more of the firm or the subsidiary's securities. Beneficial interest includes holding 5% or more of any class of the firm's securities in nominee shares, street names, or some other method of holding securities that does not disclose the beneficial owner. Holding a management position in the firm, such as a director or officer. The ability to control or influence the election, appointment, or tenure of directors or officers in the firm. Ownership of 10% or more of any of the assets of a firm, such as equipment, buildings, real estate, or other tangible assets of the firm, and holding 50% or more of the indebtedness of a firm. So that's quite a wide definition of what is significant interest. It's not limited to just a pure percentage of interest of ownership. So let's take a look at the next slide. Now that we've covered what's prohibited, we're going to cover what you have to represent in your solicitation response. You have to represent whether the offeror has submitted with its offer the disclosure required in paragraph D of this provision, which we'll get to that in just a moment, but also that the offeror represents by submission of its offer that the government of a country that is a state sponsor of terrorism does not own or control a significant interest in the offeror, a subsidiary of the offeror, any other firm that owns or controls the offeror. So let's take a look at the next slide where we can discuss the disclosure requirements. You have an obligation to disclose in your offer whether a country that is a state sponsor of terrorism owns or controls a significant interest in your company. This disclosure also carries over not only to when you submit your proposal, but it carries over throughout the offer, the performance of the contract as well. As of the date of this provision, The state sponsor of terrorism includes Iran, North Korea, Sudan, and Syria. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. Now we're going to cover, and we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about tax exemptions. So for those projects that are covered, that are performed in Italy, you will have DFARS provision 252, 229, 7012. This is tax exemptions related to Italy. It's pretty standard in that the government has entered into an agreement that they are exempt from any payments of IVA tax or any other tax that's specified in DFARS section 252-229-7003. And by submitting your offer, you are representing that your pricing that you include with your offer does not include the taxes identified within this provision. Let's take a look at the next slide. This is very similar to the last slide we were on, this last DFARS provision. This one, though, relates to Spain. So in accordance with tax relief agreements, the U.S. government has come to terms with the Spanish government that any resultant contract that arises from activities due to United States forces being located in Spain will be exempt from the excise, luxury, and transaction taxes listed in paragraph B of the clause of DFARS 252, 229, 7005. You are going to represent in your offer that the pricing that you are submitting does not include the taxes identified therein, that excise, luxury, and transaction taxes. Additionally, what's important to note is that you are also including the pricing of your subcontractors. So you want to make sure that that your subcontractors are clear not to include any of those taxes for those projects that are performed in Spain. Let's take a look at the next slide. Here we're going to cover, we're going to shift gears one more time. This is the representations of the extent of transportation by sea. This applies to all solicitations except those for direct purchase of ocean transportation services or those with an anticipated value at or below the simplified acquisition threshold. You will be representing in your offer that you either do or you do not anticipate that supplies will be transported by sea in the performance of any work. Let's take a look at the next slide. We will be covering in this DFARS provision, this is 252-209-7002, disclosure of ownership or control by a foreign government. Obviously, at this point, you can gather Department of Defense is extremely concerned about control of by a foreign government, especially those that promote acts of terrorism and such. So this one specifically prohibits the award of any contract to an awardee where the entity requires access to prescribed information to perform the contract and the entity is controlled by a foreign government, unless the Secretary of Defense or designee has waived the application. So what you will be providing here is you are representing that you will disclose whether the offeror, which is, whether you have any interest, there's any interest a foreign government has in your firm, in the offeror or an offeror subsidiary or a parent company of the offeror to when you submit your bid. And they suggest that if you need, you may have to, you may not have enough space to provide, and if you need to include more additional information, they ask that you use this format. So let's take a look at the next slide so you can see the format for your disclosure. Here, as you can see, they want you to provide the offeror's point of contact for the questions about the disclosure. You're likely to get a follow-up call asking questions. They want you to identify the name and the address of the offeror, the name and the address of the entity that's controlled by the foreign government. That can be the offeror itself or a subsidiary or a parent company, and the description of the interest, ownership percentage, and identification of the foreign government. Now remember, significant interest is much wider than just an ownership percentage. This includes, whether, the offeror or the subsidiary has more than 50% debt to the other entity. Let's take a look at the next slide. We'll now cover the DFARS 252, 225, 7000. This is the Buy American, the Balance of Payment Program Certificate. In any solicitation, including solicitations using FAR Part 12 procedures for the acquisition of commercial items, that includes the basic or the alternative clause 252, 225, 7001, Buy American and Balance of Payment Program. If the solicitation includes the provision FAR 52204-7, the contracting officer does not have to separately provide this provision, but does not have to separately provide this provision 225-7000. It's important to know that a qualifying country means a country with a reciprocal defense procurement memorandum of understanding or international agreement with the United States in which both countries agree to remove barriers to purchase of supplies or produced in the other country or services performed by sources of the other country, and the memorandum of agreement complies, where applicable, with the requirements of Section 36 of the Arms Export Controls Act and with 10 U.S.C. 2457. The following are qualifying countries as of the time of this, as of today: Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, Czech Republic, Denmark, Egypt, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Israel, Italy, Japan, Latvia, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Portugal, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, Turkey, the UK, and Northern Ireland. Finally, I want to just note that this public interest exception for qualifying countries applies only to contracts that are awarded by the DoD. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. And we're continuing with the 225-7000 Buy American Balance of Payments Program Certificate. And we're now going to cover the certifications and identifications of the countries of origin. Here, it's important to note that a domestic end product means an unmanufactured end product that has been mined or produced in the United States. And what you are certifying to is that all of the line items in the Buy American and Balance Payment Program basic clause of the solicitation, that each end product, except those listed in paragraph C2 and C3 of this provision, is a domestic end product. And for end products other than cost items, components of unknown origin are considered to have been mined, produced, or manufactured outside of the U.S. Let's take a look at the next slide. This is the 252-225-7000. This is the, just so you know what the certification identifications of the countries of origin look like. They want you to identify the line item number and the country of origin, just in case you have to make any of those disclosures. And for those of you that are wondering what a commercially available off-the-shelf item is, this is any item of supply, including construction materials, where a commercial item is sold in substantial quantities in the commercial marketplace, and it's offered to the government under a contract or subcontract at any tier without modification in the same form in which it is sold in the commercial marketplace. Important to note, this does not include bulk cargo as defined by 46 U.S.C. 40102, such as agricultural products and petroleum products. Let's take a look at the next slide.
Sorry about that, Diana. We're just having some technical difficulties, but I'm going to try and fix that in just about a minute or so.
Okay, no worries. I'm going to go ahead and continue on. I just want to describe for you what alternate one is for this. We're still on 252-225-7000. Alternate 1 is use this following provision when you're adding South Caucasus, Central, and South Asian states, and the South Caucasus and Central South Asian state end products. So this alternate is used there in very particular areas where they're going to allow those types of qualifying country end products. We're now going to move on, and I know that the slides aren't quite there yet. Oh, actually, next slide. We're going to move on to 252, 225, 7020. These are your trade agreement certificates. What's important to note here is in solicitations that include FAR Part 12, procedures for the acquisition of commercial items, that include the basic or alternate 2 of the clause 252, 225, 7021, that it's not required if FAR 52204-7 is identified that you separately list this provision in the solicitation. So you may or may not see this, but that does not, it's something that you want to keep an eye out when you're looking through your list of FAR and DFARS provisions that are either in full text or by reference in your solicitation. So more specifically with this trade agreement certificate, what you are about, the government is going to evaluate your offer in accordance with these sections, and they're only going to consider offers of end products that are made in the U.S. or a qualifying country or a designated country end product unless there are no offers of such end products, the offers of such end products are insufficient to fulfill the government's requirements, or there's a national interest has been waived, waiver has been granted. Let's go ahead and take a look now at some of these very specific boycotts. We're going to move on to the next slide. This is DFARS 252, 225, 7031, the secondary Arab boycott of Israel. It's important to note here that you will be certifying whether the offer is a foreign person or the offer certifies by submission that the offer does not comply with the secondary Arab boycott of Israel. If your solicitation includes this provision, I just kind of want to go over a few definitions for you to make sure you understand what a foreign person is. A foreign person means any person, including any individual, partnership, corporation, or other form of association other than a United States person. Let's take a look at the next slide. And we're going to, kind of wrap up the Buy American Free Trade Agreement with 252, 225, 7035. And what this states is that the government's going to evaluate your offer in accordance with Part 225 of the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. And more specifically, they're going to evaluate your offer for qualifying country end products or free trade agreement country end products other than the Bahrain end products, Moroccan end products, Panamanian end products, or Peruvian end products without regard to the restrictions of the Buy American or balance of payment programs. So this one is very specific. If they're going to, if you're going to see end products by any of these countries, and those countries again are Bahrain, Morocco, Panamanian, or Peru. I'm sorry, that's Panama or Peru. Let's take a look at the next slide. This is DFARS provision 252, 226, 7002. This is the representation for demonstration project for contractors employing persons with disabilities. If a solicitation contains this provision, then the purpose of the demonstration project is to provide defense contracting opportunities for entities that employ severely disabled individuals. To be eligible for an award and offer must be an eligible contractor as defined as paragraph A. We don't have that paragraph identified here, but just to be clear, An eligible contractor means a business entity operated on a for-profit or nonprofit basis that, 1, employs severely disabled individuals at a rate that averages not less than 33% of its total workforce over the 12-month period prior to issuance of the solicitation. 2, pays not less than the minimum wage prescribed pursuant to 29 U.S.C. 206 to the employees who are severely disabled individuals. And 3, provides for its employees health insurance and retirement plans comparable to those provided to employees by business entities of similar size in its industrial sector or geographic region. What's important to note here with severely disabled individuals, this term means an individual with a disability as defined by 42 U.S.C. 12102 who has a severe physical or mental impairment that seriously limits one or more functional capacities. What they're asking you to represent is that you either are ineligible or not eligible as defined by paragraph A, which we just went over those 3 parts. Let's take a look at the next slide. This is the last DFARS provision we're going to cover. This is 252-239-7011, special construction equipment charges. Essentially here, if you see this provision in your solicitation, you will be asked to represent that the recurring charges for any services, facilities, or equipment, they do not include the rate base, any costs that have been reimbursed by the government to the contractor. Additionally, any depreciation charges are based only on the cost of facilities and equipment paid by the contractor and not reimbursed by the government. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide and we'll wrap things up. In conclusion, I think it's important, and you probably saw the emphasis here, there's going to be some heightened security requirements in the cyberspace, with regards to CMMC. You should be looking to see some adjustments, especially here in the next 60 days. Unlike the reps and certs in the FAR, the DFARS raises a heightened cybersecurity measure to contractors who enter into a contract with the Department of Defense. This is going to be a significant area. I don't know, for those of you that recall, when provisions from SBA related to small business programs and subcontracting plans rolled out, there was a heavy oversight into those areas, and you're going to most likely see the similar things here with cybersecurity. CMMC is something that you really need to be forward thinking about. It will eventually become a bar into doing government, especially Department of Defense work in the future. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. Hopefully I was able to answer all of your questions that you may have had related to DFARS. Again, there is a tremendous amount of different provisions that can be incorporated. We covered the most prevalent ones that you're likely to see in Department of Defense contracts. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Hunter.
Thank you, Diana, for a great presentation and for sharing your time with us today. And definitely reach out if you have any questions about the content in this presentation or last week's presentation for Part 52. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this webinar. The recording will be on our website and YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. And please join us in about 10 minutes as we cover our other webinars in our DFARS series. And join us next week as we continue that as well. Have a good one, everyone.